She told me I was not invited. That sentence hit my chest like a closed door. I am Evelyn Parker, 74 years old, a widow who has been the steady hand for my only son Michael for nearly 5 decades. I raised him on nights when the city smelled of fried onions and rain, when his small sneakers thudded against the wooden stairs, when I stitched his first coat with trembling fingers. For 20 years after his father left, I worked double shifts, took in cleaning jobs, skipped my own medical appointments, and sent whatever I could spare to help him rent a modest house and keep the lights on. I had been the person who answered the phone at 3 in the morning when he was scared, the one who wired rent money on holidays, the one who bought the coat for his job interview. I thought that was love. I thought being available was the same as being honored. The morning I heard that I was not invited, the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee, and my hand still had flour from the biscuits I was making for the church bake sale. The phone felt heavy in my palm, and the voice was light, almost practiced. The words were heavier than any bag of groceries I had lifted in my life. For years, I had been sending automatic transfers from my modest retirement account to assist Michael and his partner. I had set recurring payments of $1,200 a month to cover rent and utilities for the last 4 years. That added up to $57,600. I had also bought furniture, counted receipts, and kept invoices tucked into a shoebox. There was a sofa I bought for $800, a used washer for $450, monthly groceries averaging $300, which totaled roughly $14,400 over the same 4-year period, and one emergency $3,200 loan I still had not been repaid for. Add in gifts, plane tickets, and hospital copays, and the full amount that had quietly left my account in support reached near $78,450. I knew every dollar because I had to. Every withdrawal showed on the small monthly statements I pored over at night beneath the lamp. Every transferred cent a proof of a life I had helped hold together. The truth, as it turned out, was not only that I had been left out of a celebration. The truth was messier and larger and had been hidden in plain sight. Rachel, the woman Michael was about to marry, had been careful and cold about the invitation. She had said that the ceremony was small and private, that only close family would be present, that they had to keep things intimate because of venue restrictions. I accepted an omission. I accepted a silence. Then, in one conversation that should have been warm and practical, Rachel said something that revealed intent and an erasure. She said in a clipped tone over the phone that certain family histories were better left unspoken, and that old ghosts made events difficult. When I pressed her about whether Michael wanted me there, she paused and then said I would only complicate things. That word complicated, soft as it was, landed like a label on my chest. It was a humiliation in daylight. I saw suddenly that the many financial acts I had performed might have been treated as a service rather than a bond, as transactions rather than as love. I went to the bank that afternoon, my coat smelling faintly of lemon cleaner from the countertops I had wiped before leaving. The teller knew me by name. I canceled the automatic transfers. I sat in the car afterward and listened to the engine hum and felt something loosen. I felt a strange, almost shocking relief when I closed the bank app and stopped the flow of money into a house that no longer seemed to hold my son. Then the calls began. A week later, there was a voice at my door. An envelope slid under my mat, and finally a printed notice. It was a small legal brief suggesting I was unfit to manage my finances and that someone might see guardianship if I did not comply. The paper smelled of printer ink and the kind of bureaucracy that pretends concern when it is actually taking control. My story is full of names and small human scenes that felt like betrayals because they came from people whose faces had been in my home for years. Michael, my son, who had been both tender and careless, who had left his coat on my couch more than once like a child dropping toys, who had a voice that in moments of stress drifted into the same tone his father used when he wanted to avoid blame. Rachel, 31, with measured speech and tidy hair, who said she wanted order and privacy and who believed that history can be edited. Leela, Michael's biological mother, a Black woman from a town 2 hours away who vanished from our lives when Michael was 3 and who I had believed to be gone. Tom Alvarez, the attorney I hired, a compact man with a steady voice and a folder always overfull with highlighted sections. Dr. Helen Simmons, a geriatrician psychiatrist who conducted an evaluation that was impartial and thorough. Mrs. Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, who brought over lemon bars and a witness statement about how I lived and how I made my own decisions. Angela Ruiz, my friend from the senior center, who reminded me that dignity is not a zero-sum game. Carla Rivera, a social worker who helped trace Leela and muddled through decades of mixed records when others had given up. Marcus Lee, a private investigator with a coffee habit and a respectful way of asking tough questions. And Judge Roberts, whose courtroom smelled of old wood and paper and who listened with a patience that felt like it could tip the scales. The real rupture, the public humiliation that made me do something, happened in a short scene that I wish I could unhear. Michael called from the venue, his voice tense and then muffled as if there were music behind him. Rachel was at his side. I could hear a glass clink and someone say hello, and then Rachel spoke directly into the phone. The following is the exchange as I remember it. "Hello," I said, my voice small. "Evelyn," Michael said. There was noise in the background. "Am I coming?" I asked, trying to keep my hand steady where the phone warmed the skin near my ear. "No," Rachel said plainly. "We are keeping it very small." "We are keeping it very small," Michael repeated, quieter, almost as if he were apologizing but not meaning it. "I have some things here I would have liked to do," I said. "I bought a dress. I cleaned the church pew where I planned to sit." "That is not what this is about," Rachel said, her words clipped like clean cuts. "This is our day. Please understand." "I have helped you pay for rent," I said, remembering the bank receipt like a talisman. "I wired money when the heater broke." My voice trembled. "I know you helped," Rachel said. "We appreciate it, truly. But some families have complicated histories, and we want simplicity on our wedding day." "Do you not want me because of who I am?" I asked, though I knew by then the answer was more about who she wanted us to be. "It is nothing personal," Rachel said, a rehearsed pause. "It is about the look we are going for." Michael's breathing came sharp into the receiver. "Mom, please," he said. "I am asking you to trust me on this." "Trust you to what?" I said. "To ask me to stop coming to my son's wedding after I have helped him through everything?" "Please," Michael said again. "Please stop. For us." I felt the floor tilt. I looked down at my hands and saw the age spots like islands. The phone seemed suddenly too small to hold all of that absence. I hung up. The taste of copper came into my mouth with the suddenness of dizziness. The sound of the church bell in the distance felt like someone marking a loss. That was the last straw that made me cancel the transfers. That was the moment I wrote down in my head as the exact point where generosity had been recoded as entitlement. I will not pretend that I took the next steps without fear. The first action was financial, and it was practical. I went to the bank and I froze the automatic payments. I wrote a letter to Michael explaining my hurt and my limits. Then, when the first legal notice slid under my door, I felt anger sharpen into resolve. The notice had been accompanied by a polite but firm suggestion from a local law office that perhaps a guardianship evaluation would be in everyone's best interest. It implied confusion and a need for oversight. It was a tactic dressed as concern. At around the 33rd percent of this story, when the audience has settled into indignation and identification, I reached out to you. If you are feeling a rush of anger, a tightness behind your ribs, or the recognition of a familiar sting, know you are not alone. Has this happened to someone you love? Have you ever had to stop sending help because it was being turned into a weapon? If so, write yes or no in the comments and tell us in one sentence what you did. Your voice will matter to someone who needs permission to act. Your story can be the map someone else follows out of confusion. I read every comment and I will respond when I can. Now, back to how a sequence of documents and a stubborn search revealed truth that none of us had expected, and how those truths changed the course of a wedding that was trying to be tidy at the expense of a life. The first retaliation came the day after I canceled the transfers. There was a knock at my door, and there was a young man with a clipboard who introduced himself as a representative from a home care agency. "We received a referral," he said, scanning his notes as if he were already practicing empathy. Neighbors were concerned. His badge reflected the afternoon sun. I heard the neighbor who had called the agency mention my name with worry. That same day, an anonymous email suggested I had been shopping excessively and implied my memory was unreliable. I felt small as a coin in a fountain of rumors. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who had known me for 16 years, came over with a pot roast and sat down and said, "Evelyn, do not let them tell you who you are." Her eyes were wet with an earnestness that smelled faintly of peppermint from her cough drops. Angela brought a stack of my old receipts and said, "Here, everything you need is here." I hired Tom Alvarez because he had a reputation for meticulousness and for protecting elders with clarity and patience. Tom sat across from me at my kitchen table, his suit smelling faintly of coffee and file paper. He asked me to tell him everything in chronological order. I told him the dates and the amounts and the small humiliations. He wanted bank statements, shoebox receipts, text messages, email threads, and witness names. He made a list. Marcus Lee, the investigator, started by examining a folder I'd had for years labeled Michael's childhood. He found an old hospital bracelet with a name on it that did not match the name I had always associated with Michael's birth mother. That bracelet smelled faintly of old adhesive and antiseptic. It was the thread that began to pull the tapestry of our past apart and reveal a seam I did not know existed. A procedural paragraph that is technical but clear is necessary here. To file opposition to a guardianship petition, the first step is to respond formally to any notice with a written denial, backed by documentation of financial autonomy, such as bank statements, proof of pension deposits, and copies of recurring transactions showing intentional distribution. Then, one requests an independent evaluation from a licensed geriatric psychiatrist and submits sworn affidavits from non-related witnesses who can attest to daily competence. The court typically appoints a conservatorship investigator whose report weighs heavily in early hearings, so timely and thorough documentation is critical. As the investigation continued, Marcus found records in a county hospital archive that showed Michael had been registered under a different surname at birth. That name led to Leela Stanton. I had known a woman named Leela many years before, and I had assumed she was gone. I had assumed things because assumptions are easier than truth in small towns. Marcus found her in a nursing facility 3 hours away. He came back with photos and a sleepy voice and a plan. Leela was alive, her hair silver at the roots, her hands still capable of strong gestures. She had raised Michael for 3 years before life circumstances made their relationship fractious and complicated. Over the decades, mistakes and separation had translated into silence and then into a kind of erased history. Rachel had told Michael, or believed, that certain family narratives complicated the image she wanted for their wedding. She had apparently encouraged the idea that Leela was deceased. That lie mattered because it allowed a new narrative to be created, one that made visibility and history optional. There is a scene of confrontation that is a pivot. Rachel arrived one afternoon with a lawyer I had never met, and the presence of that lawyer felt like an attempt to take the moral high ground by wearing formality. The lawyer introduced himself as Mr. Graham and had a cold, precise manner. The conversation in my living room that day was dense and full of edged phrases. The following is a reconstruction of that exchange, a sustained dialogue of 9 turns, because the law treats words as evidence and because each line mattered in establishing intent. "Mrs. Parker," Mr. Graham began politely, flipping a file open, "our client is concerned for the stability of the family." "I have lived with stability," I said, my voice steady. "I pay my rent. I take care of myself." "Your son and his fiancée only ask for privacy on their wedding day," Rachel said. Her voice was even, as if she were reading from a script she had rehearsed. "Privacy is one thing," I said. "Erasing people is another." "Erasing is not the language we are using," Mr. Graham said. "We are seeking to prevent confusion and distress during a major life event." "Are you asking me to be non-existent on this what day?" I asked. "We are asking for boundaries," Rachel said. "Boundaries are healthy." "When did boundaries start to include rewriting someone's history?" I asked. "Some histories are painful," Mr. Graham said. "Not all gatherings are suited for every relationship." "What if the painful history needs to be acknowledged to heal?" I asked. "That is not the purpose of the ceremony," Rachel said. "Whose ceremony is more important than a life?" I asked. "Whose right is it to tell a son who his mother is?" The room went quiet like a theater holding its breath. Mr. Graham closed his file with a soft sound. I smelled his cologne, faint and citrus. The exchange left no winners, and it made clear that the strategy was to formalize exclusion by paperwork and by cloaking preference as prudence. I then followed every legal path available. I asked Dr. Helen Simmons to conduct a geriatric psychiatry evaluation so the record would show my competency. Her report was precise and humane. She visited my home, listened to me recount the history, administered assessments, and observed my routines. Her report concluded that I was capable of managing my finances and understood the consequences of the transfers I had initiated. In language that is clinical yet human, the report stated that I had decision-making capacity and was not in need of a guardian. That report smelled not of ink, but of clear, impartial observation. I also secured witness affidavits. Mrs. Jenkins wrote about the dinners she had shared with me and how I counted my medication and paid bills on time. Angela documented my attendance at the senior center and my role leading the knitting group. Carla Rivera from Adult Protective Services helped me file complaints about attempted coercion and helped Leela. Tom Alvarez drew up an accurate timeline of transfers and prepared an exhibit listing each payment and its purpose. The exhibit itemized dates and amounts. 01/15/2019, transfer to rent, $1,200. 03/02/2019, washer purchase, $450. 11/10/2020, emergency loan, $3,200. Recurring grocery support averaging $300 per month, and so forth. The total was presented as an equation in court, not to shame, but to clarify the pattern. There were moments of high tension that felt like the sharpest edges of this story. One such moment was when I first sat in front of Leela in the nursing facility. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and hospital soap. Leela raised her hand in recognition and smiled a small, fragile smile. She said, "You were always like a sister to me," and I heard years congeal into that brief line. The moment was painful because it was proof that the past had been erased deliberately and tragically. Another moment of tension occurred when I first read Rachel's text messages after legal counsel subpoenaed them. The messages were practical and then strangely dismissive. We have to think about appearances, and this complicates what we want. The bluntness felt like a blow. A third moment came in the courtroom when Michael was called to the stand. He had to choose between the narrative he had been fed and the messier truth that papers and witnesses now presented. He hesitated, and in that pause, I saw the child who had once hidden under tables when life thundered, and the adult who had learned to avoid storms by deflecting. The court day itself was long and slow, like an old clock being wound. Judge Roberts listened with a face that did not betray impatience. Tom Alvarez presented exhibits. Dr. Simmons testified and explained clinical reasoning in a manner that was both technical and accessible. The cross-examination was careful and probing. The exchange in the courtroom included many speakers and lasted for hours. There were technically oriented testimonies about banking procedures and signature authentication, and there were personal testimonies from Mrs. Jenkins, Angela, and Carla about my daily functioning and independence. Marcus presented evidence that Leela was alive and had not been legally declared deceased. That last revelation shifted the moral center of the case. When Marcus laid out the records he had retrieved, the sound of paper being placed in front of a clerk had the gravity of evidence. The judge called a recess, and the hallway smelled of old coffee and anticipation. A compact technical description is useful here for listeners who may face similar legal maneuvers. To contest a guardianship petition, one must assemble documentation showing routine financial activity, secure a competent medical evaluation attesting to decision-making capacity, obtain witness affidavits to corroborate competence, and challenge any petition on the grounds of lack of probable cause, presenting alternate narratives and documentary proof to the court. Courts rely heavily on independent medical and social assessments before appointing a guardian. In the end, the judge found that there was insufficient evidence to appoint a guardian and that my actions were purposeful and within my rights. More significantly, the court ordered that Michael meet with Leela under supervised circumstances and that the matter of any alleged willful deception be further examined by family services. The sentence the judge read was a mixture of legal jargon and human consequence, but at its core, it acknowledged my agency and denied the attempt to minimize it. When the verdict came, I felt an unexpected combination of vindication and sorrow. Vindicated because the law had affirmed a truth I had been living, sorrowful because the court could not unmake the months of humiliation. After the ruling, there were private conversations that were quieter and more raw than anything that had happened in the courtroom. Michael and I sat on a bench outside the courthouse. The sun felt hot on my shoulders, and there was a faint scent of car exhaust and spring pollen. He said, "Mom, I did not know," and his voice was small. I told him about the hospital bracelet, about the records Marcus had found, about the way Leela had called out his name like a bell. I told him I had not withheld anything to punish him. He listened and then said, "I am sorry. I let her shape my memory." I could feel a fracturing that could be mended if we were both willing. We both cried, and the crying felt like rain on a parched patch of soil. The victory was legal, but not entire. Rachel and Michael moved forward with a smaller ceremony later, one where Leela attended and where my name was called in the vows. It was awkward and healing in unequal measure. They chose different words in their promises that night. Michael stood and said, "I was shaped by both of you," and that phrase cut through the years of omission like a thread finally drawn. Leela hugged him with arms that had raised another child long ago and smelled faintly of lavender. I watched and felt in waves a reclaiming that no money could have bought. Over the following months, my life found new rhythms. The epilogue is important because it shows how legal action is only part of recovery and how material realities change slowly and unevenly. 1 month later, I had consolidated my finances, set up clearer boundaries, and met with a financial advisor recommended by Tom. The advisor helped me create a monthly budget that allocated a modest amount for gifts and assisted living expenses when necessary, while protecting my essential funds. I also donated a small portion of the money I had received from selling a piece of inherited jewelry to a local nonprofit that supports elder rights because giving felt like reclaiming agency. My days were filled with small wins. Mrs. Jenkins came by every Tuesday with soup and a crossword puzzle. Angela and I started a weekly walking group that met at the park where the air smelled of cut grass and distant barbecue. I took a short art class at the community center and found that my hand still had a steady line when drawing faces. Emotionally, I was more cautious, and that caution was a form of armor that did not feel like bitterness, but like care. 3 months later, Michael and Leela had started to rebuild their relationship. They spoke on the phone regularly. Michael called me one evening to say he had started looking into meeting with a family therapist. He said, "I need to learn how to hold both histories without erasing either." I felt hopeful and also aware of the slow work ahead. Tom helped me file an official correction on certain county records and worked with Carla to ensure Leela had access to benefits that she had been missing. Financially, I felt more secure because my accounts were monitored in a way that allowed independence while preventing misappropriation. Marcus called occasionally just to check if I needed help with anything. His voice on the phone had become less private eye and more of a concerned neighbor. I had also started volunteer moderating a small support group for seniors who had faced exploitation. Our meetings were a mix of practical tips and shared stories, and I felt that my experience was being turned into a tool for others. 6 months later, the changes were more settled. Michael and Rachel had separated, a painful but honest decision they each made when they realized they had different understandings of family, memory, and truth. Rachel moved to another state. Michael moved into a small apartment closer to the community center where I taught a weekly art class. Leela visited frequently and sometimes came over at my house to tend the small herb garden I had started. We planted rosemary and basil, and I taught her how to prune the thyme. The garden smelled of earth and rain and hope. Financially, I had reclaimed savings and had set up an account that required a second signature for withdrawals over a certain amount. That procedural safety measure provided me peace of mind, and it was implemented with clear legal steps: a joint account with limited withdrawal privileges and an attorney-certified power of attorney limited to specified tasks if ever needed. I traveled once with Angela to the coast, and we sat on a bench that tasted of salt and old seaweed and talked about the absurdity and the sweetness of being alive. There are practical lessons that come out of this story, and I will name them plainly. Document every transfer. Keep receipts and make a chronological list of any financial assistance you provide. If someone suggests guardianship or curatorship, request an independent medical evaluation from a licensed geriatric psychiatrist. Gather witness statements from neighbors, friends, and professionals who can attest to daily routines and capacities. Consult an attorney who has experience with elder law and who will file precise exhibits and responses to petitions. If family stories are being rewritten, seek records and reach out to social services who can trace histories that have been obscured by time and neglect. Protect bank accounts with thresholds and alerts. And do not let shame keep you silent. There is no disgrace in protecting what is yours and in demanding to be seen. My final words are both a recapitulation and a call to action. I learned that generosity can be weaponized when it is not accompanied by boundaries. I learned that love is not only what you give, but also what you preserve so you can continue to give. I sold a small piece of inherited china and used part of the proceeds to donate to an elder rights organization that had helped me navigate forms and calls in the bleakest days. I used the remainder to make small changes in my living space that made my days more pleasant, like repairing the kitchen chair that had always been slightly wobbly. If you are watching and you recognize this sting, document, protect, and seek help. Comment below with one thing you would do differently if you could go back. Share this story with someone who might need it. Subscribe to this channel to learn more about rights, documentation, and stories of recovery. Each voice matters. Each shared experience can be the lantern someone else needs to find their way. In the end, I did not lose the wedding because I wanted to be there for the ceremony itself. I wanted to be there because family is not a picture to be curated. The truth about Leela was the truth that saved my son from a lie. I lost money and I gained clarity. I lost illusions and I gained a quieter, truer peace. The last thing I learned is this, and I leave it here as a line to carry. Dignity is not a thing given to you by others. It is a thing you reclaim for yourself and teach others to honor.